A millionaire miraculously found a little homeless girl on the highway. Her parents wanted to ruin her life, but the millionaire saved her from starvation. The Los Angeles skyline sparkled in the distance, its glittering lights a stark contrast to the dark, winding stretch of Pacific Coast Highway. Nathan Cross, a 38-year-old tech tycoon, steered his sleek Tesla Model S along the curves of the road. Fresh from a long day at a charity gala downtown, he was eager to get home to his Malibu estate. Nathan wasn't a man to linger on the small talk and schmoozing that events like this demanded, but his assistant had convinced him it was good optics for his burgeoning tech empire, Crosspoint Industries. His mind wandered to the projects waiting for him: new ventures, algorithm improvements, deadlines. The hum of the car's engine and the soft playlist piping through the speakers were almost enough to make him forget the world outside, until he saw her. A figure appeared in the faint glow of his headlights. A girl, no older than 16. She staggered along the shoulder, her movements erratic. Her blonde hair was matted, her clothes torn, and dark streaks of dirt and blood marred her pale skin. Nathan's heart lurched as he swerved to a stop. Jumping out of the car, the coastal breeze hit him with an unexpected chill. "Hey!" he called, jogging toward her. "Are you okay?" The girl froze, turning toward him with wide, frightened eyes. For a moment, it seemed like she was about to bolt, but instead, her knees buckled and she collapsed to the ground. "Hey! Hey!" Nathan dropped to his knees beside her. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, and she murmured something unintelligible before falling silent. Her body was cold to the touch, her hands like ice. "Damn it," Nathan muttered, scooping her into his arms. Back in the car, he laid her in the passenger seat and cranked up the heat. Reaching into the console, he found a clean towel and draped it over her shivering frame. Her breathing was shallow but steady, a small relief in the otherwise surreal moment. Nathan glanced at her again as he drove. Who was she? What was she doing out here alone in this state? The drive to his Malibu estate felt longer than usual. By the time he pulled into the expansive driveway, the girl stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Where am I?" she whispered, her voice weak. "You're safe," Nathan said gently. "I'm Nathan. I found you on the road." She blinked, as if struggling to make sense of her surroundings. "Thank you," she managed, before drifting back into unconsciousness. Nathan carried her inside, startling his housekeeper, Rosa. "Senor Cross," Rosa said, hurrying to meet him. "Who is this?" "I don't know," Nathan admitted, setting the girl gently on the sofa. She was wandering on the highway. "I need you to bring some tea and blankets." Rosa nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. Nathan turned back to the girl, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She looked so fragile, so out of place in his sleek, modern home with its panoramic ocean views and minimalist design. Minutes later, Rosa returned with a steaming mug of tea and several blankets. Nathan helped the girl sit up, her body still trembling. "What's your name?" he asked softly, holding the mug to her lips. "Lena," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Lena," he repeated. "Do you know what happened? How you ended up out there?" Her eyes welled with tears, but she shook her head. "I can't." Nathan didn't press her. "It's okay. You don't have to explain now. Just rest." As Lena sipped the tea, color began returning to her cheeks. She leaned back against the sofa, her breathing evening out. "Thank you," she said again, her voice steadier this time. "You don't have to thank me," Nathan replied. "But you're safe now. That's what matters." He stayed with her until she drifted off to sleep. Later that night, as Nathan sat in his study, Unwinding with a glass of wine, he turned on the news. The TV displayed the usual montage of city updates: traffic jams, celebrity gossip, crime reports. Then, a breaking news alert caught his attention. Missing teenager search. Authorities seek help locating Lena Vogel, 16. Last seen near Westwood. Nathan froze, the glass of wine halfway to his lips. The screen displayed a picture of Lena, a school photo, with her hair neatly combed and a shy smile on her face. "What the hell?" he muttered. The news anchor explained that Lena had run away from home after a fight with her parents. Her aunt, who had been searching for her, had contacted the police, citing concerns about Lena's safety. Nathan leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. The girl asleep on his sofa wasn't just a stranger in need. She was at the center of a search that could land him in hot water if he didn't handle it carefully. The next morning, Nathan sat across from Lena in his sunlit kitchen. Rosa had prepared a hearty breakfast, but Lena only picked at her food. "Lena," Nathan began, his tone measured, "I need to ask you something important." She glanced up, her blue eyes wary. "I saw the news last night," he continued. "Your aunt filed a missing person report. The police are looking for you." Lena froze, her fork clattering onto her plate. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "Please don't send me back. I can't go back to them." Nathan reached across the table, his hand gentle on hers. "Calm down. I'm not going to do anything you don't want. But you need to tell me everything. About your parents, your aunt, and why you ran away." Tears filled her eyes, and she hesitated before speaking. "My parents, they're not good people. They don't care about me. My aunt is kind, but she lives far away. I ran because I couldn't take it anymore." Nathan's expression softened. "And the forest? How did you end up there?" "I got lost," Lena admitted, her voice breaking. "I was trying to stay off the main roads. I didn't want anyone to find me. But I ran into a bear." "A bear?" Nathan's eyes widened. Nathan leaned forward, his eyebrows raised in disbelief. "A bear? You ran into a bear?" Lena nodded, her trembling hands gripping the edge of the table. "It was the scariest thing I've ever experienced," she said, her voice breaking. "I was walking through the forest, trying to stay hidden. It was dark, and I could barely see anything. All I could hear were my own footsteps crunching on the leaves and branches." Nathan stayed silent, letting her continue. "Then I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the sound got louder. Heavy footsteps, twigs snapping. I turned around, and there it was, this huge bear coming toward me." She shuddered, her blue eyes wide with the memory. "What did you do?" Nathan asked, his voice low. "I froze," Lena admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't know what to do. My dad used to say that if you see a bear, you should stand still and not run. But I panicked. It roared, and I ran." Nathan's chest tightened. "How did you get away?" Lena took a deep breath, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the table as she recalled the harrowing encounter. "I ran as fast as I could, but it kept coming. It was so loud, crashing through the trees. I could hear its claws scraping against the bark. I tripped a few times, and I thought that was it. I thought I was going to die out there." "But you didn't," Nathan said softly. "You're here." "I found this cluster of bushes," Lena continued. "They were thick and thorny, and I figured maybe the bear wouldn't be able to get through them. So I dove in. The thorns scratched me up pretty bad, but I didn't care. I just curled up and tried to make myself as small and quiet as possible." Nathan's jaw clenched at the thought of her huddled in the freezing darkness, terrified and alone. "It sniffed around for a while," Lena said, her voice trembling. I could hear it growling, its breath so close I could almost feel it. I kept thinking, this is it. This is where it's going to find me. She paused, wiping at her eyes. But then, after what felt like forever, it just walked away. Nathan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That's incredible. You kept your wits about you in a situation like that. Not many people could. I don't know if I'd call it wits, Lena said with a sad smile. I was just lucky. When I finally got out of the bushes, I realized I was lost. I didn't know which way was which. I just kept walking, hoping to find a road. And eventually, I found you. Nathan sat back, his mind racing. The idea of a 16-year-old girl navigating the wilderness, outrunning a bear, and surviving the freezing night was almost too much to process. He had always considered himself a man of action, but even he couldn't imagine what Lena had endured. You're stronger than you realize, he said after a moment. Lena shook her head, her eyes downcast. I don't feel strong. I feel scared. I'm scared all the time. That's normal, Nathan said gently. After everything you've been through, it's okay to feel scared. But you survived, Lena. And now, you're not alone. She looked up at him, her expression a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. Thank you, she whispered. Lena, he said finally, I'm going to help you. You don't have to go back to your parents. I'll contact your aunt, and we'll figure this out. You're safe here, and I'll make sure it stays that way. For the first time, Lena's lips curved into a faint smile. Thank you, she whispered. Nathan nodded, his resolve hardening. Whatever it took, he would make sure Lena never had to feel unsafe again. The following morning, the sun rose over the Pacific, casting its warm glow on Nathan's Malibu estate. Inside, Lena sat across from Nathan at the breakfast table. Despite the smell of freshly brewed coffee and warm pancakes, she barely touched her food, her thoughts seemingly miles away. Lena, Nathan said gently, breaking the silence. I've been thinking about what you told me yesterday. We need to figure out the next step. Lena hesitated, her fork hovering over her plate. I don't know what step to take, she admitted. I don't want to go back to my parents, but I don't know where else I belong. Nathan leaned forward, his tone patient. Why don't you tell me about them? Maybe I can help you figure it out. Lena sighed, her fingers tracing the edge of her plate. They're not bad people, she said carefully, as though trying to convince herself. At least, they didn't start that way, but they care more about their problems than they do about me. Nathan frowned, but didn't interrupt. My dad used to be a mechanic, Lena continued, her voice quieter now. He was really good at it. Everyone said he could fix anything, but he got injured a few years ago, something with his back. He couldn't work anymore, and everything started falling apart after that. What about your mom? Nathan asked softly. Lena swallowed hard. She's always been fragile. She tried to hold things together, but she got overwhelmed. She started leaning on things, drinking mostly, and after a while, it felt like I didn't exist to her anymore. Nathan's chest tightened. I'm sorry, Lena. That's a lot for anyone to go through. She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. I don't think they mean to be like this. I think they love me in their own way. But it's not enough. I can't keep pretending it's okay when it's not. Nathan reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on hers. You don't have to pretend anymore. I'll help you find a place where you feel safe and cared for. Lena nodded, her tears spilling over. Thank you, she whispered. Later that day, Nathan sat in his home office, using his connections to locate Lena's aunt, Margaret. It didn't take long for him to find a phone number and address matching Lena's description. He hesitated before dialing, unsure of how the conversation would go. After a few rings, a woman's voice answered. "Hello?" "Hi, is this Margaret Vogel?" Nathan asked. "Yes. Who's calling?" "My name is Nathan Cross," he said, his tone careful. "I'm calling about Lena." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Lena? Have you seen her? Is she okay?" "She's safe," Nathan assured her. "I found her on the side of the highway last night. She's been staying with me, but she told me about her situation, and I wanted to reach out to you." Margaret's voice trembled with relief. "Oh, thank God! I've been so worried about her. Is she hurt?" "No, just shaken. She's been through a lot, but she's incredibly strong. I think she'd feel better if she knew you were involved." "Where are you?" Margaret asked. "I want to see her." Nathan gave her the address, and they arranged for her to come by that afternoon. When Margaret arrived, Lena was waiting nervously in the living room. As soon as the door opened and her aunt stepped inside, Lena ran to her, throwing her arms around her in a tight embrace. "Margaret!" she cried, her voice cracking with emotion. "Oh, Lena," Margaret said, holding her close. "I've been so worried about you." Nathan watched from a respectful distance, his heart warming at the sight of their reunion. Over coffee, Nathan explained everything to Margaret. The circumstances of how he'd found Lena, her account of life with her parents, and her harrowing escape through the forest. Margaret listened intently, her expression shifting between anger, sadness, and relief. "I knew things weren't great at home," Margaret said, her voice heavy. "But I didn't realize it was this bad. I've always told Lena she could stay with me, but her parents, they've always had a way of keeping her under their thumb." "Well, I'm here to help," Nathan said firmly. "I want to make sure Lena never has to go back to that environment. If it's okay with you, I'd like to support both of you, financially, emotionally, whatever it takes." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "That's incredibly generous of you, but why would you do all this for us? You barely know Lena." Nathan glanced at Lena, who was sitting quietly beside her aunt. "I know what it's like to feel alone," he admitted, "and I have the means to make a difference. If I can help Lena build a better future, I will." Margaret nodded, her gratitude evident. "Thank you. From the bottom of my heart." Nathan leaned forward, his expression sincere. "I want to make sure you and Lena have everything you need to start fresh. Here's what I propose. I'll find you a rented house, a safe, comfortable place where you can both settle. I'll cover the first few months of rent to give you time to get back on your feet." Margaret blinked in surprise, her eyes filling with tears. "That's more than generous." "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Nathan replied with a soft smile. "And that's not all. I'll help with groceries and essentials to make sure you're set up for success. And, Lena," he turned to the teenager, who was sitting silently beside her aunt, "if you're willing, I'd like to help you go to college. It's your choice, of course, but I want you to know that the opportunity is there." Lena's eyes widened. "College? I don't even know if I'm ready for that." "You don't have to decide today," Nathan assured her. "But I believe in you, Lena. You're capable of so much more than you realize. When the time comes, I'll make sure you have everything you need to chase your dreams." Margaret covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed. "Nathan, I don't even know how to thank you. You've done so much already." Nathan shook his head. "You don't have to thank me. Just focus on building a better future for Lena. That's what matters." Over the next few days, Nathan worked tirelessly to fulfill his promise. He reached out to his network and found a cozy two-bedroom house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, not far from Lena's school. The house had a small garden in the back, a bright kitchen, and enough space for Margaret and Lena to create a new life. Nathan coordinated with a moving company to furnish the house, selecting comfortable but practical furniture. He stocked the pantry with groceries and filled the fridge with fresh produce, milk, eggs, and other essentials. When Lena and Margaret first stepped inside their new home, their reactions made all of Nathan's efforts worthwhile. "This is ours?" Margaret asked, her voice trembling as she looked around. "For as long as you need it," Nathan said with a smile. "I hope it feels like home." Lena walked through the house in awe, her fingers brushing over the kitchen counters and the soft fabric of the living room sofa. "It's perfect," she said quietly. "Thank you, Nathan." One evening, as they settled into their new home, Margaret's phone rang. She frowned when she saw the name on the screen. "It's my sister," she muttered, her tone sharp. "Lena's mother." Lena tensed, retreating to the couch. "Why is she calling now?" Margaret answered the call, her voice cold. "What do you want?" "Where is she, Margaret?" The voice on the other end slurred slightly, filled with accusation. "I know you have her. You need to send her back home. She's our daughter." Margaret's grip on the phone tightened. "Your daughter? You've done nothing but neglect her. She's been fending for herself while you drown in your own mess. Lena is safe with me, and she's not coming back to that hellhole." "You can't just take her," the woman snapped. "We'll get the police involved if we have to," Margaret scoffed. "Go ahead, see how far you get. Do you think they'll side with you after hearing what Lena's been through?" "You're lucky I haven't reported you myself." There was a moment of silence on the other end, followed by a string of incoherent muttering before the call ended abruptly. Margaret sighed, placing the phone on the table. She looked over at Lena, who was staring at her with wide, frightened eyes. "Don't worry," Margaret said firmly. "You're not going back there. Ever." Lena nodded, but her hands were still shaking. Nathan, who had overheard the exchange, placed a reassuring hand on Lena's shoulder. "She's right. You're safe now. No one is taking you away." Though Lena managed a small smile, the tension in the room lingered, a reminder that the past wasn't so easily left behind. The days passed peacefully in the new house Nathan had arranged for Lena and Margaret. The small suburban neighborhood was quiet, with neatly trimmed lawns and friendly neighbors who waved in passing. For the first time in years, Lena felt a sense of stability. Margaret had begun to pick up odd jobs in the area, tutoring students in English and managing inventory for a small local store. It wasn't much, but it gave her a sense of purpose. Lena, meanwhile, had started attending a nearby school. Though the transition was daunting, she was determined to make the most of this new chapter in her life. Nathan continued to check in on them regularly. He stopped by with groceries, offered to help with repairs around the house, and even brought over a laptop for Lena to use for her schoolwork. "You don't have to keep spoiling us, you know," Margaret said. One evening, as Nathan dropped off a bag of fresh produce. "It's not spoiling," Nathan replied with a smile. "It's support. And besides, it's nice to see you both doing so well." One afternoon, as Lena was working on a history assignment, Margaret came into the room holding her phone, her face tight with frustration. "Your mother called again," she said. Lena's shoulders stiffened. "What did she want this time?" "She's threatening to take legal action," Margaret said, her voice laced with anger. "She claims she's going to fight to get you back." Lena's stomach churned. "But she doesn't even care about me. Why now?" "She doesn't want you," Margaret said bluntly. "She wants control, and maybe a chance to make trouble for me because I've finally taken a stand." Lena's heart sank. She had hoped her mother would simply let her go, but it seemed the woman wasn't willing to give up so easily. "We're not going to let her do anything," Nathan said firmly when Margaret called him later to update him on the situation. "If she tries to take legal action, I'll make sure you have the best lawyer to fight her. Lena isn't going back to that toxic environment." Margaret sighed. "It's not fair that she has any say in Lena's life after everything she's done." "No, it's not," Nathan agreed. "But we'll handle this. She's not getting her way." Despite Nathan's reassurances, the tension weighed heavily on Lena and Margaret. The thought of facing Lena's mother in court was daunting, but they tried to push forward. Lena threw herself into her schoolwork, hoping to distract herself from the looming threat. She quickly gained the admiration of her teachers for her diligence and curiosity, and a few classmates even reached out to befriend her. Margaret, meanwhile, focused on saving as much money as possible in case they needed to cover unexpected expenses. She was determined to do her part, even if Nathan was more than willing to shoulder the financial burden. One evening, as Lena and Margaret were finishing dinner, the doorbell rang. Margaret opened the door to find Nathan standing on the porch, holding a folder. "What's this?" Margaret asked as she invited him in. "Some research I had my lawyer do," Nathan explained. "I wanted to get ahead of anything Lena's mother might try." Margaret flipped through the folder, her eyes scanning the documents. "Custody laws. Proof of neglect." Nathan nodded. "If she wants to fight for custody, she'll have to prove she can provide a stable environment. Given her history, that's not going to be easy. And I have plenty of resources to make sure she doesn't get away with anything." Margaret placed the folder on the table and sat down, exhaling deeply. "Thank you, Nathan. I don't know where we'd be without you." Nathan smiled. "You don't have to thank me. This is about doing what's right for Lena." Lena, who had been listening quietly from the couch, got up and walked over to Nathan. "You're always helping us," she said softly. "But why? I mean, why do you care so much?" Nathan looked at her, his expression earnest. "Because everyone deserves someone to care about them, Lena. When I was younger, I didn't always have that, and I don't want you to feel like you're facing this alone." Lena's eyes glistened with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. A week later, the storm hit. Margaret received a formal letter from Lena's mother's lawyer, demanding a meeting to discuss custody. It was clear that Lena's mother had no intention of backing down, and the letter was filled with accusations designed to paint Margaret as unfit to care for Lena. "She's twisting everything," Margaret fumed as she handed the letter to Nathan. "She's claiming I'm unstable and that I kidnapped Lena. Can you believe this?" Nathan read the letter carefully, his jaw tightening. "She's grasping at straws," he said, "and this proves that she doesn't have a solid case. We'll respond through my lawyer and make it clear that we're ready to fight." Margaret nodded, her anger giving way to determination. "I'm not letting her take Lena. She's had enough chances to do right by her, and she's failed every time." The following days were a flurry of activity as Nathan's legal team prepared their response. They gathered evidence of Lena's mother's neglect and documented the positive changes in Lena's life since moving in with Margaret. Though the process was exhausting, it brought Margaret and Lena closer together. Margaret shared stories of Lena's childhood, reminding her niece of the times they had spent together before things had gone wrong. "Do you remember when we used to bake cookies at my old house?" Margaret asked one evening as they sat on the couch. Lena smiled faintly. "I remember getting flour everywhere. You were so mad." Margaret chuckled. "I wasn't mad. I was just pretending to be." You looked so guilty. I didn't have the heart to scold you." Lena laughed softly, the memory a brief reprieve from the stress of the present. Nathan watched them from across the room, his heart warming at the sight. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together. The day of the custody hearing arrived with an air of tension and uncertainty. Margaret and Lena stood outside the Los Angeles County Courthouse, their nerves apparent in the way they fidgeted and adjusted their clothes. Nathan stood beside them, exuding calm confidence, his tailored suit immaculate and his presence reassuring. "You've got this," Nathan said to Margaret, his voice steady. "Just tell the truth. The evidence is on our side." Margaret nodded, taking a deep breath. "I just hate that it's come to this." Lena, clutching her aunt's hand, looked up at Nathan. "What if they believe her?" "They won't," Nathan assured her. "Not when they see how much better your life is with Margaret." As they stepped into the courtroom, they were greeted by the sight of Lena's mother, disheveled but defiant, sitting with her lawyer. Her glare was piercing as it landed on Margaret and Nathan. "She's got a lot of nerve," Margaret muttered under her breath. Nathan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Don't let her get to you. We're here for Lena." The hearing began with Lena's mother's lawyer presenting her case. He painted a picture of a loving, misunderstood parent who had been unfairly separated from her child. He accused Margaret of alienating Lena from her parents and claimed that Lena's mother had been actively working to turn her life around. Margaret clenched her fists under the table, her frustration mounting as lie after lie was spun. Then it was their turn. Nathan's lawyer, a sharp and confident man named Alan Hayes, presented the mountain of evidence they had gathered. Photos of Lena's parents' neglected home, testimonies from neighbors, and records of Margaret's efforts to provide for Lena painted a stark contrast to the story Lena's mother had tried to sell. Finally, Margaret was called to the stand. She recounted Lena's struggles in her parents' home and spoke passionately about her commitment to giving Lena a better life. Her voice trembled at times, but her sincerity was undeniable. "I'm not here to take Lena away from her family," Margaret said, her eyes welling with tears. "I'm here to give her the chance she deserves, a chance she's never had with her parents." When it was Lena's turn to speak, the courtroom fell silent. She looked small and fragile as she sat in the witness chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Lena," the judge said gently, "can you tell us what you want?" Lena glanced at her mother, then at Margaret, and finally at Nathan, who gave her an encouraging nod. "I just want to feel safe," Lena said, her voice trembling. "I love my parents, but they've never really been there for me. My mom cares more about her problems than she does about me. My aunt has always been the one I could count on. She's the one who makes me feel like I matter." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that hung heavily in the air. The judge took the arguments and testimonies into consideration and adjourned for a brief recess. Margaret, Lena, and Nathan waited anxiously in the hallway, their hearts pounding. "What if it's not enough?" Margaret whispered. "It is," Nathan said firmly. "It has to be." When the judge returned, the courtroom was hushed with anticipation. After reviewing the evidence and hearing from all parties involved, the judge began, "It is clear that Lena's best interests lie with her aunt. Custody is hereby granted to Margaret Vogel." Relief washed over Margaret and Lena as they embraced tightly. Nathan smiled, his heart swelling with pride and happiness for them. The battle was over, but the journey was far from finished. Over the following months, Nathan continued to support Lena and Margaret as they settled into their new lives. Lena's confidence grew as she thrived in school. She joined the debate team, excelled in her classes, and even began planning for college. Margaret found stability in her work, and the house Nathan had rented for them became a warm, welcoming home. One sunny afternoon, as Nathan visited for lunch, Lena handed him a sealed envelope. "What's this?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Just open it," Lena said, her cheeks tinged with pink. Nathan opened the envelope to find a letter of acceptance from UCLA. "I got in," Lena said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "I'm going to college." Nathan grinned, his pride evident. "I knew you could do it." Margaret wiped away a tear. "Thank you, Nathan. We wouldn't be here without you." Nathan shook his head. "This is all you, Lena. I just gave you a little push. The rest was you." Life continued to blossom for Lena and Margaret, but not everyone shared in their happiness. Lena's mother resurfaced sporadically, attempting to stir trouble with angry phone calls and baseless accusations. But each time, Margaret and Nathan stood firm, refusing to let the past disrupt their progress. The bond between Nathan and Lena deepened over time. He attended her high school graduation, cheering louder than anyone else in the crowd. When she began her freshman year at UCLA, he was there to help her move into her dorm, offering advice and encouragement. "Don't forget," he said with a smile as they unpacked boxes, "you're capable of amazing things. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." Lena hugged him tightly. "I won't. Thank you, Nathan, for everything." Years later, as Lena graduated from college, Nathan sat in the front row alongside Margaret, beaming with pride. As Lena delivered her valedictorian speech, she looked directly at Nathan and said, "There are people who come into your life and change it forever. For me, that person is Nathan Cross. He gave me the chance to believe in myself, and for that, I'll always be grateful." Nathan felt a lump in his throat as the crowd erupted in applause. Back at Margaret and Lena's home that evening, they celebrated Lena's achievement with laughter and stories. Nathan raised a glass, his voice steady but full of emotion. "To Lena, the bravest, smartest, and most determined person I've ever met. You've come so far, and I can't wait to see where life takes you next." "To family," Lena said, her smile radiant. "To family," they echoed, clinking glasses. And for the first time in years, Lena felt like she had finally found where she belonged. Thank you for listening to this story. Please write in the comments what you would do if you were Nathan, if you were afraid to stand alone in the forest against a bear. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Also, write your stories in the comments, and maybe your story will be next on the channel. See you later.